Hey y'all, Rebecca back for the next episode of the Monday Mr. Money Mustache Motivation. Mondays on my channel are dedicated to sharing a blog post from Mr. Money Mustache's website. He is a super popular financial independence retire early blogger, and on Mondays I share a blog post of his to spread the word about financial independence. Today's post is from May 20th, 2013. This one's titled, "Do We Need to Fire the Entire Financial Advice Industry?" This one might ruffle a few feathers. Let's see what Mr. Money Mustache has to say about this topic. Financial media. It is a key cog in today's ever-turning news machine because, hey, who isn't interested in money? Everyone has a go at it, from the tanning salon smile hosts of the regional news shows reporting the daily dose of the Dow Index, up to the PhD credentialed economists who debate economic indicators and fiscal policy on Wall Street Week. The New York Times is fond of publishing mature-sounding, sympathetic stories about the hard times we as a culture have with money, with nary a face punch in sight. Other newspapers do their own take on things, usually with a slant towards the sensational rather than the practical. And a zoo full of financial advice peddlers, Mr. Money Mustache included, has filled up the bookshelves with all sorts of advice on how to get ahead. There are some great writers, researchers, and reporters out there with a mixture of pedigree, brilliance, sharp wit, burly work ethic, and even good looks. The collective abilities of these people put a blog like Mr. Money Mustache to shame. And yet almost all of this financial writing is lacking an absolutely critical underpinning. Without this foundation, the rest of their arguments are rendered floppy and useless, and thus the entire financial media industry is mostly wasting everyone's time. This is a pretty monumental accusation for a lone writer to make from the vantage point of his living room couch, but here I am doing it, and with good reasons to back it up. Are you ready to hear what they're missing? It's the fact that most of our modern assumptions about money are bullshit. To illustrate this in a particularly grating way, let's review a little video from a big-time personal finance guru named Susie Orman. And then he has a link to the video in this blog post. Y'all, if you want to see this, I always link to the blog post I'm reading from in the description box below. So click that link to this blog post, and then you can follow the link to this video that Susie Orman did. He does provide a summary, though. In this clip, an earnest 48-year-old woman dutifully reports her financial stats to Susie. It turns out she has $1.4 million in net worth, $7,500 per month in income, lives in a reasonably priced house, and would really like to know if she can retire in 7 more years at age 55. You know, 7 years, about the total career length of some mustachians who maintain a 75% savings rate. The professional advice? You're at a D- right now, as you'll only have $1.6 million plus a paid off house by age 55. I advise you to work just an extra 14 years instead of 7, so you can have $2.5 million saved, plus presumably a lot fewer of those pesky, expensive years of life remaining that you need to fund. I hope I am not the only one who finds the above advice fucking insane. Really, there are 2 factors at work here. Susie Orman uses the ultra-conservative withdrawal assumption for retirees, assuming they will forego the better returns of stocks and only hold government bonds, which pay almost nothing these days. And this article was written in, what did I say, 2013? Yeah, bonds are still paying nothing today. This leads to a roughly 2% withdrawal rate assumption versus the 4% I'm fond of here. That's fair enough, to each their own assumptions, and I'll happily stick to my stocks, rental houses, and lending club, where I could easily maintain 6% or higher withdrawals while the principal keeps up with inflation. But that still leaves the fact that the caller listed her current monthly expenses at $6,100. This was probably including income taxes, but I found it interesting that the figure was left unchallenged, as if it's reasonable and essential for a household of 2 to exist on $73,000 per year, and she's in friendly old low-cost Colorado, no less. And of course, there was no allowance for lower costs when her 17-year-old son strikes out on his own. And it's not just the boisterous gurus with books and DVDs to sell that follow this trend. This New York Times piece states that deciding to take your lunch to work or cutting cable won't help as much as you think. To which I say, it will probably help a lot more than you think, unless you consider $60,000 every 10 years to be chump change. Instead, we are encouraged to blame the rising cost of school tuition and Medicare for our financial problems. The same author pops up again here, repeating the message that it is our world that has become difficult, and we are not at fault for financial problems. Look, if it was really so much easier for our parents' generation to stay out of financial trouble, great, good for them. But given the fact that I was able to retire about 25 years younger than my own dad, who is himself an intelligent and frugal man, I'd say the crushing forces of society on today's middle class are still not overly powerful. In a Market Watch story called Retire Early, there's one big catch. They say, yeah, you could save your money and retire early, but you might wish you still had a job, or you might day trade away all your investments and end up broke. In another Market Watch article, they say, work until you're 67 and hopefully have 8 times your salary saved up by that point. Hello, does your annual spending factor into your retirement needs at all here? In a 2008 CNN story about a 27-year-old couple known as the Rodriguezes, they pull the lever on the Financial Pro advice machine and it spits out this. You'll have only $2.9 million by age 40. You can't retire on that. Stuff might happen. Plan on working an additional 5 years while totally missing the fact that this couple really has a base cost of living of only about $25,000 per year right now, even living in the Bay Area with a WRX rally racing habit. Realistically, they can retire earlier than planned, not later. So what would I change if I could start an imaginary school for financial advisors? I would start by ensuring that every curriculum in monetary matters begins with this overlooked concept. Right now we are living at a level far beyond the basics that are required to maximize our happiness. You don't have to feel guilty or run out and change that, but just acknowledge it because knowledge is freedom. You could live on much less and with the right tricks end up even happier than you are now. It's true for virtually everyone. So what is more efficient and satisfying, keeping an unwanted job for 20 additional years to earn more money or learning the right tricks? The answer to that should depend on how much you like trading your time for money at your job versus how much various material conveniences and luxuries are worth it to you. For example, it takes a lot of time to fetch and carry your own water from a stream every day and only $25 per month or so to have clean drinking water piped right to your kitchen faucet. For most of us, this is a worthwhile trade and we'll flip burgers or sit in the cubicle as required to get this need covered. But it takes only a few hours to learn to drive a manual transmission car, and yet the skill will save you many thousands of dollars in car purchases and gas every decade. Is it efficient to trade hundreds of hours of work to avoid this single 4-hour lesson? At least 200 million Americans have missed this little bit of math, yours included. I cannot drive a manual transmission, admittedly. There is no difference between the speed at which a 2004 Honda Civic and a 2013 Honda Accord will get you to work, but the difference in operating costs will add up to many hundreds of hours of your work over the car's lifetimes. Bikes improve your life even while reducing your need to pay for cars. Bringing your own lunch to work provides you with healthier food while allowing you to keep much more of the money earned while working. Spending a few hours learning about investing, debt, and frugality before borrowing $50,000 for a university education cuts years off of the debt a young person needs to incur. The list could go on until we simplified the typical person's life down to something that would cost between $5,000 and $25,000 per person per year in the US without compromising their ability to live a happy life. Most of the remaining things we have in our lives, even ones we happen to enjoy, aren't fundamentals for human happiness. They're just cultural norms programmed in differently for each country by the marketing of corporations who sell the non-fundamental products. But the assumption by financial advisors these days is that consumption is just a personal choice. All of it is reasonable and none is ridiculous, and more is naturally better if you can afford it. Frugal people are written up as mildly entertaining oddities. Wow, things sure work out well for them. Too bad you can't do that in real life. These aren't really personal choices. They're fundamental financial rights and wrongs, which should be considered just as core to good financial advice as don't use lottery tickets and casinos as your investment vehicle. If you converted this financial advice into medical advice, you'd have doctors advising patients to start missing sleep so they can spend 50 hours per week running on a treadmill just because they happen to like eating 5 gallons of ice cream and deep dish pizza every day. Nobody would dare mention the pizza and ice cream because that would be preachy or promoting scrimping and saving only to live a deprived lifestyle. A more useful type of financial advice, First, get your shit together. Develop a life where you can live happily on any amount. Then, from the vantage point of financial maturity, you can decide if you want to go on to become Mr. or Mrs. Fancy Pants by branching out into some extreme form of extreme consumer connoisseur specialty like 250 horsepower vehicles or 5-star hotel hopping. To do it the other way around is just to create a lifetime of unnecessary monetary stress, which is bad advice. Alright guys, I loved this one because it is another truth bomb that really probably grates a lot of people the wrong way by Mr. Money Mustache. But really, I think this highlights one of the fundamentals of the FIRE movement that really does get missed a lot by mainstream financial advice. Mainstream financial advice will tell you to reduce your debt, increase your income, invest the difference, and then eventually over time you will become financially independent. But a big piece that the mainstream financial advice misses is the thing that Mr. Money Mustache preaches on so much, which is frugality. And y'all, people assume that frugality equates to deprivation, and it does not have to be that way. Like he says in the article, and I think this sums it up perfectly, the assumption by financial advisors these days is that consumption is just a personal choice, all of it is reasonable and none of it is ridiculous, and more is naturally better if you can afford it. And that is why people think that the FIRE movement is unrealistic and unattainable. They see people out here like me and others in the FIRE movement trying to live as frugally as possible so that we can save as much money as possible and invest as much money as possible so we can reach financial independence at an age that is much, much younger than traditional retirement age. People think that's impossible because they never stop to consider whether or not they could reduce their expenses or their cost of living. People think that if they have to make those choices, then they would naturally be more unhappy. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think those of us in the FIRE movement just have a lot clearer vision over what we all individually think is worth spending our hard-earned dollars on. We realize the full opportunity cost of the choices that we make. If we choose to not ride a bike, for instance, then we know the opportunity cost of that choice. And all of us have to decide individually what is worth spending our money on versus not. That is why you will find people in the FIRE movement that have a lot smaller financial independence numbers than what I do, and you will see people who are working towards a much larger financial independence number than what I am. And that is okay because everybody has to determine what their own cost of living is and what they want their lifestyle post-FIRE to look like. So yeah, I hope that y'all enjoyed this one. I will link to all of the rest of the Mr. Money Mustache articles that I have done at the end of this video, and I'll catch you guys next Monday for the next episode. Thanks for watching, y'all. Bye.